My life is a miracle. Every child has a story of God's love to share. Shalom World, tune into God's love story.
You've been using that term domestic church a lot.
Hope not too much.
No, I love that term, but I don't know if everybody knows what it means. It took me a while to figure out what it meant.
Yeah, it's something that I think we all hear. Maybe not everybody hears, but we've said a lot, and it's also mentioned a lot in kind of Catholic thought and those types of things. But I think what you will see today in the couples that will speak about what a domestic church means is just their own personal encounter with Christ in their home and in their family. I think, in my own opinion, a domestic church is really a place that it's something that we can really offer to God, a life of thanksgiving and praise.
And our home isn't just our domestic church. It's really a missionary outpost of the local church. It's a place where anyone can have an encounter with Christ, where anyone could just get to know a little bit more about who God is, who Jesus is. So our church, there are familiar rituals, there's customs that we have, there's prayers that we do, there's things that we do as a family that really help us to be closer to God, bring our children closer to God, and bring others closer to God. And our home, there's so many beautiful ways that you can help your home to be a church that is lived out every day.
So if you are involved in your parish or your own church in any way, stay with us, and you'll be able to see today the voices, the testimonies of couples who are really living that missionary outpost life, that really living a domestic church so that their home can be truly connected to the sacramental life of the parish.
It'll be your duty to bring this baby to keep God's commandments by loving God and loving neighbor. So it is through the testimony of our own love for God and love for neighbor that this church, this domestic church begins.
Loving Samuel is part of my salvation. Like it's for us to help each other to get to heaven, like our goal is to be saints. And God thought that this path for us to help each other, that's our path, And also later, God willing to help our kids to also be saints and to grow in the faith as well.
Love of God and love of neighbor. So if that's what you do at church, then we ought to do this at home, because we didn't want to be the family that was just the Sunday church-going family. We wanted it to be the most important thing, that church wasn't an afterthought, or it became, secondary to extracurriculars. We wanted church and Jesus to be the most important thing in our household.
I think you start to develop the domestic church and you bring it into the world when you follow the first commandment that God gave us, to be fruitful and multiply.
Becoming a young mom and with my younger children, when you're in that early stage and you're just struggling to have time to pray, and then you start thinking about how do I want to teach my children to pray. And at that time, then I started to discover all the treasures of our faith, and that we have so much. We're celebrating all the time.
In the house, in the family, on the simple ways you start teaching your kids about about worship. That's what my mom did with me.
The domestic church is just being open to love in a holistic way, being open to giving it and being open to receiving it, and the rest follows. God provides.
We want to take a moment to discuss the gift of the domestic church and look at that in sort of the reality that it really is. I think about when we were building our home that I know I felt like God put a vision on my heart that our home would be a place in some ways like the experience of the rosary where joyful things will be offered, joyful things will be experienced, sorrow, but also glorious experiences in life. And oftentimes we also say too that, the home is definitely a missionary outpost of the local parish. And for families watching this all over the globe, I think it's good for us to hear from, someone who's been working at Marriage and Family now 22 years about what is your experience of, and how would you define and articulate what a domestic church is?
Well, at the root, to me, and me as a deacon, who I have the chance of celebrating the sacrament of baptism, there's a little phrase at the beginning of the rite that says, is addressing the parents. It said, it'll be your duty to bring this baby to keep God's commandments by loving God and loving neighbor. So it is through the testimony of our own love for God and love for neighbor that this church, this domestic church begins.
I've heard it said once that the most important homily your children will ever hear is your marriage. So just in that frame, since we go to church at times, obviously we hear a homily. But I mean, Veronica, what is the homily about marriage that you want your kids to hear? Or our relationship with God, what do you want them to know?
Well, we began our dating relationship by doing things at church together. We both helped out with RCIA, and we ended up loving, the Triduum and all the events at the church. And being the Catechism says that parents need to be the primary teachers for their children, and we wanted them to know and love all the things of the church. So if the church had, the Advent wreath out, or they covered the religious images during the Triduum, during Lent, then we wanted to do that at home too. So we did literally, before the term domestic church became part of our language, we wanted the church to be, whatever was at church, we wanted it to be at our house too. Prayer, and like Juan said, love of neighbor, love of God and love of neighbor. So if that's what you do at church, then we ought to do this at home, because we didn't want to be the family that was just the Sunday church-going family. We wanted it to be the most important thing, that church wasn't an afterthought, or it became, secondary to extracurriculars. We wanted church and Jesus to be the most important thing in our household.
I think the domestic church is very important, and to really remember that that's part of our vocation, whenever we are to get married, that we are kind of almost, how do you say, creating this environment to form our kids well in the faith. I think it's our responsibility whenever we do become parents, and even with one another, we are helping each other to grow in holiness. And I remember, I think one time in prayer, I felt like Jesus was kind of saying that, loving Samuel is part of my salvation. It's for us to help each other to get to heaven, our goal is to be saints. And God thought that this path for us to help each other, that's our path, to assist each other. So to help to help each other become saints, and also later, God willing, to help our kids to also be saints and to grow in the faith as well.
When I think in domestic church, I always think the they should be the first place where you worship God, where you pray. Because when you're a kid, you don't understand much. Wherever you go in the mass, when you're a kid, you don't understand what they're doing, But in the house, in the family, on the simple ways you start teaching your kids about worship. That's what my mom did with me. So that's what I want to do for my family, to worship God in our family, teach them about faith or church, the beauty of the church.
Yeah, we have so many treasures in our Catholic faith, and it just excites me. As I was discovering them, becoming a young mom and with my younger children, when you're in that early stage and you're just struggling to have time to pray, and then you start thinking about how do I want to teach my children to pray. And at that time, then I started to discover all the treasures of our faith, and that we have so much. We're celebrating all the time. And what do kids love to do? They love to celebrate, they love to play. And so this makes the faith come alive for them.
And we talked about the community of other families, and we've learned so much from other families.
Their understanding and our understanding of the Mass and the Eucharist and everything just brought it into a deeper, and then going to Holy Thursday services right at that time, it all goes together, all the readings, everything, and it just brings it alive.
Have you noticed that any of the sort of domestic church traditions that your children learned in your home, have they passed this on to your grandchildren?
Yes.
They have, and they continue to do it. They've taken our script and they invite their own friends, some of our children and our grandchildren, and they've followed, they've just carried on that tradition.
Mm-hmm. I think you start to develop the domestic church and you bring it into the world when you follow the first commandment that God gave us, to be fruitful and multiply. And that's hit us hard. The reality of bringing a new child into this world with God, with His cooperation. And not only having that child for us and keeping her for ourselves as our pride, but sharing it with other people. That's something that I didn't expect. This hidden missionary, you talked about how we have a mission. The domestic church is almost like a mission outpost. Our child, I did not expect her to be a missionary already. It's amazing the joy that she brings to people universally, and I think it's because of her innocence. We are attracted to innocence and beauty because we're attracted to God, and because of that, you see that incarnated in this child, which is born of fruitful love.
Yeah, and I think that it's important that I'm very happy because she was 5 days old when we first took her to Mass, and so she hasn't missed a Mass yet. And just knowing that, we're able to share the beauty of our faith with this child, and that she's going to grow into her faith and love it and own it for herself one day, just like we're having the opportunity to do now as a young married couple, is something that is just going to help her for the rest of her life. It's beautiful.
Domestic church was to also, as a grandmother and grandfather, we decided that we wanted to have special times with our grandchildren. And we're blessed that most of them are all the same ages, okay? So this might not work as well if I had greater diversity in ages, but we have a camp we put on every summer. Now this doesn't...
Camp City.
And what we do is we get them together and then we pick a theme for the camp, and then they stay the whole week and we do different types of things. And one of the things that they've loved is the baking of bread. I've taught them how to bake bread, and we start every day with that. And it usually is around the Feast of Corpus Christi. So it all ties in there to the Eucharist, but we do a lot of outside activities, a lot of arts and crafts.
And this is
all just for your grandkids?
Just for the grandkids.
Oh,
1 week
so beautiful.
in the summer, one whole week in the summer.
That must be the best week of their year.
Every time there's a church feast, the Feast of a Saint, there's always a little altar dedicated to that saint and a little candle. We do that. Every time she reads something that caught her attention and feels that the family needs to know it, she writes it down on a little piece of paper and sticks it on the bathroom mirror. I have done homilies based on little phrases that she has put on that mirror. Yeah.
And we try to keep it simple. We don't want to, drive the kids crazy, but just little hints
sticks.
here and there.
It's little catecheses.
Yeah.
It's beautiful.
Yeah.
It's
And when
beautiful.
we learn something new, we want to share it with the kids.
Yeah. It is a little catechesis, It's very much of a tenderness of the Good Shepherd approach, where he's sort of just you living with them, you know their needs, you know how they respond to God, and you're just nurturing that, and you're in very much the way that the church is. Church is a mother, and so there should be a tenderness to it, and also a closeness and a proximity to it. I think, as Pope Francis often says.
Yeah.
With the writings of and the thought of Pope Francis, he seems to be really calling couples such as us and yourselves to be something that he refers to as evangelizing spouses. And I think a unique way that we've understood that and seen that is our homes need to be a missionary outpost for our local parish. Christianity and Catholicism, where maybe parish life feels on a decline, but have you ever reflected upon that God is also equipping you with being missionaries?
I definitely have, Ryan, because before, I remember when I was in high school, I thought about actually being a missionary. That's something I thought that I desired, and I spent some time kind of discerning that if I wanted to be a foreign missionary, but I felt like God was telling me to stay here, which is what I did. And even that was my desire. Like, I wanted to be a missionary, and then I did feel a desire to be married. I had some time to discern if I was going to be, if God was calling me to religious life. But I knew that, whoever I was to marry, like, I would hope that he had a missionary heart just like I did. And I think Sam does. He definitely does, and because we have the same mindset that, at the end of the day, it's really all about souls. It's all about, getting ourselves to heaven, but also helping those we encounter. And oftentimes it's going to be in ordinary ways, in our places of work or wherever we are. I find like there's always an opportunity to share your faith. And it doesn't have to be necessarily saying like, let me take you to church with me, but let me establish a relationship with you and like pray for you or just be there for you.
I just see people being drawn to it. We have friends, we've made new friends, and people have seeked us out because they see the joy, they see the love, and it's something that we're honored to have. We didn't expect it, and I don't know, it's everyone's reaction has been so good, and I did not think this would happen from a baby. I was like, yeah, we're having a kid, and now I'm like, okay, we had a child, and like, it is a great and beautiful child, and she brings something to this world that I never expected. And not only sharing her with others, but Tori was saying, sharing our inheritance, what we've received from our families and giving it to her, that will only increase her ability, and it's just a good feeling.
And even like from the smallest of babes, you can just walk into church and a little child is like, oh, they have a baby. Look how precious that baby is. And it's like, my mother went to a retreat recently, and she was saying how, our eyes are mirrors to something greater, and how just looking in the eyes of this child, this innocent, beautiful child that is unable to sin right now and is free of original sin from baptism, that she mirrors something so beautiful. You can just see a little piece of heaven in her eyes, you know? So it's,
It just seems like the domestic church is just being open to love in a holistic way, being open to giving it and being open to receiving it, and the rest follows. God provides.
When there's something wrong with the body, we normally look at the cells, the smallest structure of the body. So if I have cancerous cells, even though I look healthy, my body is going to be compromised. And the same thing is true with society. If there's problems in society, and we are all realists, we know there are problems in society, it's because the smallest cell of society, there's problems. And the same thing is true of the church. There's a lot of criticism about the church is this, the church is that. But the smallest cell of the church is not the priest. The smallest cell of the church is the family, which we call the ecclesia domestica, or the domestic church. So the family, husband and wife and children, is a microcosm of what the church is. So a little microcosm of the Trinity being shared in with others in the home. And so when we speak about the domestic church, one of the commitments that a couple make in getting married is with the sacramental grace and the support of the church to live the church in a form at home, so that we have a little church. And of course, with pandemics and different crises, we find that can very much be a catalyst to spending time of trying to develop a church at home. So religious objects, religious art, statues, practices, getting up in the morning and praying. This is something that's very important. A family that prays together stays together. And so the church has to exist at home. As a priest, I have to pray personally, and then I have to pray as a community. I'm in a religious community. But married couples, they really have 3 moments of prayer. They have to pray personally because God's dealing with them in a very personal, by name fashion. So they have to have private prayer by themselves. Then as a couple, that's the team and friendship of marriage. They have to pray together. But then with children, there has to be that moment of gathering the family. So moments of prayer before meals, morning prayers, a prayer in the evening, family rosary, deck of the rosary, praying the chaplet, prayers getting in the vehicle. So as a child, we always had that, and we certainly cultivate that. And so in working with couples, we try to see how can they live, for example, like preparing the gospel on Sunday for the children and sharing about the gospel prior to the Sunday Mass, or some program of doing that, the moments of prayer, the forgiving, caressing conflicts. This is all the domestic church. This is so to walk into the family, to walk into someone's home, they can basically see the church in minuscule, the church in microcosm. So we need to spend our time working on forming the domestic church, because any of our problems in the church, we can look to the smallest cell of the church, the domestic church, and see there where we need to work. And the same thing is true of society. If there's problems in society, probably because the smallest cell of society, the family, is in need.
The domestic church is such an important part of who we are as a family, how we raise our children, and just the way that our family life looks and sounds and feels, not just to us, but to those around us. The customs that we create, the culture that we create within our home, the memories that our children will treasure and that will help them grow in their faith life.
The covenant of the Holy Sacrament of Matrimony really allows us to create a space, a holy place in our home. That's a safe place for us as a married couple. It's a safe place for our children, but it's also an amazing place of hospitality where people come in. They may be believers, they may not be believers, but we just really welcome them, and we allow them to sort of see what it means to love in the Lord.
It should be not just walls, not just a house, but a home, a sacred space, a space that will bless everyone who enters your home. So enjoy your domestic church, share your domestic church, pray in your domestic church.
Don't be afraid to open up the doors to your domestic church to allow Christ in, and also to allow Christ to be shown to the world.
Yeah. To all of the viewers of Shalom TV throughout the world, I want to encourage you not only to support this amazing media apostolate, but to spread the word to others. We all know how the internet and mass media are polluting the world with the poison of pornography and so much other forms of materialism. This is the source of eternal life, the gospel, and Shalom TV is consecrated to spreading the word of Christ. Thank you.